I'm Lois Corby, and on my podcast, Home Within, we create space for all of our beautiful humanness. Honest conversations about the nervous system, self-awareness, emotional healing, and learning to feel more at home within ourselves. Today I want to talk about something that I believe is at the root of so much suffering and also so much personal growth, and that is this: your life won't change until your nervous system does. Now, before anyone panics, I don't mean that you need to fix yourself. I don't mean that you need to become calm all the time. And I definitely don't mean that your nervous system is broken. What I mean is that many of us are trying to create a different life whilst operating from the same patterns, fears, and conditioning that created the life we're currently living in. And if we're not aware of that, we can spend years trying to change the wrong thing. For a long time, I thought my life would change when my circumstances changed, when I found the right relationship, when I felt more confident, when I was less anxious, when I had more certainty, when I had things figured out. But what I've come to realise is that life started changing when my relationship with discomfort changed, when my nervous system started learning that feelings weren't emergencies. Because when we're dysregulated, we make very different decisions. We seek relief, we seek certainty, we seek distraction, we seek comfort, and often, without even realising it, we organise our entire lives around avoiding feelings. One example for me happened recently whilst I was away in Italy. I was at a beach club and I wanted to move to a different sunbed. That was it. Nothing dramatic, no major life decision. I simply preferred a different spot. It had a better view of the sea. But I noticed this discomfort arise in my body. What if people think I'm awkward? What if I'm being difficult? What if they think I'm ungrateful? And for a moment, I found myself wanting to stay exactly where I was. Not because it was what I wanted the sea view, but because it felt more comfortable than risking the potential of somebody else's disapproval. Now, on the surface, moving a sunbed seems completely insignificant, but that moment showed me something important. The discomfort wasn't about the sunbed. It was about what my nervous system had learned over many years. It had learned that keeping other people happy felt safer than disappointing them. It had learned that fitting in felt safer than expressing a preference. And I think those small moments reveal so much about the bigger patterns running in our lives. Because when I look back, I can see the pattern in much larger decisions too. For years, I stayed in my career as a social worker long after I knew something wasn't right. There were parts of the work I loved. There were people, children I cared deeply about. But there was also a growing feeling that I wanted something different. And the interesting thing is that I didn't stay longer than I wanted to because it was aligned. I stayed because it was familiar. It was predictable. It was known. And sometimes the nervous system would rather stay with what's familiar than move towards what is truly aligned, even when we know something isn't right for us anymore. The beach bed was a tiny example. Leaving social work, a bigger one. My marriage, even bigger. But underneath all of them was the same lesson. The discomfort wasn't telling me that I was making the wrong decision. The discomfort was simply telling me I was doing something unfamiliar. And those are two very different things. And I think this happens everywhere in our lives. We confuse familiar with safe. We confuse familiar with normal. Sometimes we even confuse familiar with who we are. The relationship isn't aligned, but it's familiar. The job isn't aligned, but it's familiar. The coping mechanism isn't aligned, but it's familiar. How about this one? The constant busyness isn't aligned, but it's familiar. And because it's familiar, our nervous system keeps pulling us back towards it, even when
Another part of us wants something completely different. This is why willpower alone, it just often doesn't work, because we're trying to override years of conditioning without addressing what sits underneath it. For me, wanting to move beach beds had nothing to do with the beach bed. It was about learning how to stay with the discomfort that came afterwards. The restlessness, that growing feeling, that sensation in our body, the agitation, the discomfort. Because what I discovered was that the feeling wasn't actually telling me I needed to stay where it was. And old versions of me would have interpreted that. The feeling comes up, it means no, 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 I can't do that. I need to stay where I am. But actually, the feeling is just telling you there's a feeling. And so over time, my nervous system has learned something new. I moved beach beds that day. I taught myself that it could survive the urge. Over time, my nervous system has learned something new. It learned that I could survive the urge. And I have so many examples of this. It learned that discomfort passes. It learned that I didn't need to obey every single feeling that appeared. And that's when real change becomes possible. Not because I forced myself, but because I became available for a different experience. Because I could sit in the discomfort of the unknown. And I think this is true whether we're talking about alcohol, relationships, people pleasing, overworking, scrolling, perfectionism, or anything else. So often we're trying to change the behaviour whilst leaving the underlying nervous system untouched. But if your nervous system still believes that discomfort is dangerous, you'll keep finding ways to escape it. The goal isn't to never feel discomfort. The goal is to become capable of staying with yourself when the discomfort arises. Because once you can do that, something really powerful happens. You stop making decisions purely to get relief, and you start making decisions from alignment, from values, from truth, from what you actually want. And in my experience, that's where life starts to change. Not overnight, not dramatically, but quietly, steadily. You find yourself responding differently, choosing differently, showing up differently. And eventually, that's when you look back and see that your life looks completely different. Not because the world changed, because you did. At one point during coaching, I had a real light bulb moment. I realised that there wasn't actually anything wrong with me. Now, that doesn't mean nothing had happened. I'd experienced loss, like so many of us. I've experienced things in childhood that no child should have to experience. And like most of us do, I spent years unconsciously creating meaning from those experiences. I had ideas about what they meant. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm not enough. People always leave. Maybe I'm hard to love. Maybe I have to work harder than everyone else. Maybe I need to prove myself. The experiences were real, but the stories I'd created about myself weren't necessarily true. And I remember sitting there thinking, hang on a minute, what if this is true? What if there's something in this? What if these are just programs? What if these are simply beliefs I've practiced over and over again for a very long time? Because that's the thing, we're all walking around with a set of programs running quietly in the background. Programs about money, programs about love, programs about success, programs about our worth, programs about what is possible for us. And the good news is that programs can be updated with neuroplasticity. We know neural pathways can be rewired with new habits, new thinking, practiced repetition. The fact that you've learned something means you can unlearn it. The fact that you've practiced something means that you can practice something different. Now, I want to be really clear. This doesn't mean it's easy. Sorry for anyone who's disappointed by hearing that. Going against 3+ decades of conditioning is not easy. There will be so many moments where you just want to go back to what feels familiar. But I'll remind you, familiar doesn't always mean aligned, and it doesn't always mean true. And having that awareness is beautiful. The beautiful thing is that your nervous system is not a life sentence, it's a learning system. Every time you choose differently, every time you stay with a feeling instead of running from it, every time you challenge an old belief, you start to practice and build something new. You're building evidence. Evidence that you're safe. Evidence that you are capable. Evidence that you are not who you once believed yourself to be. Because here's what I believe, and you can take it or you can leave it, but everything you're looking for is already within you. And it's not because life is always easy. It's not because you'll never struggle, but because the safety, peace, confidence, and self-trust you're searching for, they were never outside of you in the first place. You are far more powerful than you've been taught to believe, not because you can control everything, but because you can learn to respond differently to what life brings. And when you do that, your entire experience of life begins to change. What if there is nothing missing? What if the peace you're searching for isn't something you need to find? What if it's something you remember? Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.